I think this is meant to be a time where you all get to ask questions and he gets to answer you.
Before we go, she mentioned that we were hippies. Her nickname used to be No Nukes. Just thought you ought to know that.
Oh, no, that's all.
So does anybody have any questions?
Thank you.
I'll try a question.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I've always been intrigued by the name entertainment, areas.
Yeah.
In big cities. And our entertainment seems to be split into a whole lot of little smaller gatherings rather than having one where when people say the entertainment, division here, we wouldn't really know where to go. Is there any attempt to kind of create a obvious space to go?
The funny thing is we're trying to make the whole town a cultural destination. That's been kind of the plan where it's just continuous every place you look. But, for the kids, it's downtown where the clubs are, and but other of us have it in different places, and Dance Alive is building a brand new center themselves. And, I mean, there's a lot going on, but it's not consolidated because there's no central push anymore. Cultural affairs used to be that push. And for some years now, they've just tried to keep up with everything that was going on. But still, they wouldn't have been able to move anybody's location to make a critical mass, which would, of course, be nice, So the whole town is the critical mass. I mean, if I got to have it my way.
Dance Alive seems to be all over the place. Do they not have a central venue or just?
They don't, but they will.
They don't, but they will.
Oh, I see. They don't, but they might.
Bill, did you alluded to that when you got back,
Yeah.
you had a difficult time. Can you talk a little about that?
Yeah. So, I had done, in World War II, everybody got on the ship and came back together. And so they processed the whole time on the ship. We were 24 hours from being in the field to out on the street. And so for a lot of people, that was hard. I had been out of the field for 18 months when I got home and had done a lot of self-reflection along with other infantry veterans at that time. And so when I came home, what I really had was a serious case of survivor euphoria. I learned that term from the junks in the Chinese harbor will pick out a big ship, a big cargo ship, and they will go along, and then at one point they just go right in front of that ship, and the ship's mast cuts off the evil spirits that were trailing them. So they all have survivor euphoria. They think it's because the spirits are gone. I think it's because they survived, But I got home, and yeah, there were things. For how many years did you jump under the table when there was a loud noise? Yeah. Huh? Right, that's right. But for a long time, if the door slams, man, you're under the table. So that was one of them. But I felt so glad to be alive that I was just, I was grateful most of the time. And so my reentry was not turbulent. So many people had a hard reentry. So many people had a hard time letting it go, because if this was all for nothing, then that's too much to be borne. you know, and so a lot of people would say, well, we should have done this, God damn it, you know, and I say, God damn it, parenthetically rather than as something that I'm sustaining. Yes.
I just came across a 50-year-old photograph of my mother going through the snow to the mailbox in New York. And I realized that she had that picture taken because that was her contact with me for that year while I was in Vietnam. And she'd go down to the mailbox and see whether there was a letter, dirty old letter from me.
Well, you know, I have to say that I got home and I said to my mom, Mary Lou, where are my letters? And she said, oh, I threw them away as soon as you were safe. I said, oh, okay. You know, it had been traumatic for her. My mom was worked at Pratt & Whitney Aircraft. She worked at Curtiss Wright during the Second World War, where she worked on the Curtiss Helldiver, you know. And then she worked for Pratt & Whitney when we were growing up, and she worked on the SR-71, which is a Mach 3 high-flying observation thing, no weaponry on it, no, because missiles can't catch it or anything, you know, because it's so fast. But she was in at work one day, and there were these guys holding forth on what we should do in Vietnam. We should do this. We can do that. Yeah, we should do that. And my mother stood up and said, you guys have no frankincense idea what you're talking about. And she went into the restroom to wash her hands and her face, and they had cut off the hot water for cost savings. And she started to weep, and she said, then I realized it wasn't for the cost savings. And she kind of stopped going in to her government job, and she had a super secret clearance too. So the FBI came to her door, and they said, we need you to come back and clean out your desk. And she said, okay. And she went and cleaned out her desk. But there was fortunately somebody who had known her up in Connecticut when she had worked for Pratt up there. And they said, the FBI said, is she a security risk? And this guy said, no, her Billy is in the field in Vietnam. Think of what you would be like. And so they didn't bother her. They just had her clean out her desk, which was very lucky because, you know, it was a hard time. So I came home, and for some reason there was a failure in my connecting flight. So these other vets and I chartered a plane and went the rest of the way by ourselves. And I got out of that plane and I kissed the tarmac. And my parents thought that was too dramatic. And I thought, yeah, that's because you have no idea, which is just as well, you know. So anyway, this is interesting because since I got home in 70, so that's 54 years ago, this is like it's happened to somebody else, but I still remember it very distinctly in some things. You know, you remember moments in your life rather than weeks or months or years, you know, and so I remember some moments in my life. And since I told you the one song that saved my life, I'm going to tell you the other song that saved my life. So I got out of the field. I became entertainment director. I convinced the colonel that I could put together bands. We could work on morale every day. Didn't have to wait for Saigon to send us anything. And he said, put on your best uniform and comb your hair, and we'll go see the general in the morning. And I said, okay. And we came in. He said, how'd you tell the general what you told me? And so I said, sir, you know, we've got people right in the division who are professional musicians. Why can't we work on morale every day of the week? You know, we've got all these different places that these people could be raising morale, and we don't have anybody coming through. We have our own people. And he said, the general said, you trust this man, Colonel? And he said, yes, sir, I do. He said, well, make it possible for him to go to Saigon and get instruments, scrounge them. So I went down on this propeller plane, two propellers, but it was for VIPs. It was me and all the other generals. And so I got down to Saigon, and I could do the I could go to MACV, I could go to special services, but the one thing they didn't want me to do was buy one from Lemois. He made dual showman amplifiers, even though he put the name on it for you, you know? So it was not really a Fender amplifier. It was Lemois, and they were really good amplifiers, but he was a Chinese communist, so I couldn't go to Lemois. So I got drums and I got everything, and Sergeant Freire, who was my supply sergeant, he wanted to help out. So he said, Hutch, I ordered drums. I said, what really? What did you get? And he said, I ordered 12 bass drums. I said, well, thank you, Sergeant. You know, not knowing what the heck I was going to do. So I tried to play drums with 2 bass drums for a while. That's not suited to me. So anyway, Colonel Callahan was my champion. He was the adjutant officer. He was the one who made it, decided on troop strength. Now, I was an infantryman working in a different MOS, military occupational specialty, with special services. Whenever the infantrymen were used up, like Kleenexes, they had to bring everybody who was not working as an infantryman back out to the field. So that was over my head, the sword of Damocles. But one night we were practicing, just rehearsing, you know. Thank heavens we got in the stone ahead of time, because Colonel Callahan came on. And he came in and we played, and he was sitting listening and I said, Colonel, you know this song. This is Bob Dylan, Like a Rolling Stone. You can sing this. Well, come on, give it a try. So, you know, he was an ex-boxer. Once upon a time, dressed so fine, threw the bums a dime in your prime, didn't you? You know, and it was nice. We just really, you know, we got such a kick out of that. And afterwards he said, you suppose you would do this for me at the general's mess some night? And I said, absolutely. So we were invited, put on our best uniforms, combed our hair, and we went over and we played while they were eating. And toward the end, I said, Colonel Callahan, sir, you know this song. Why don't you come sing this with us? Well, he got up and came over. Once upon a time, dressed so fine, threw the bums a dime in your prime, didn't you? You know, and he got through the whole song. He had memorized it, and he finished, and the generals all jumped up and came over and patted him and hugged him. And I thought, I'll never have to go back to the field. And it was true. And when Colonel Callahan left, he told his replacement, there's one person who's an 11B infantryman working in the rear area, too important to let him go out to the field. That's Hutch. I'll introduce you to him. Guard him. He's our treasure back here. So if I had gone back after the first year in Vietnam, I would have come back. I would have been an infantryman again. I would have taught people to kill and everything. And people, my brothers there and sisters, needed entertainment so much that I was glad to be providing it, you know. So I stayed there the second year, and it was a wonderful and heady time. And let me just tell you, since we're telling war stories, I lived in this big amphitheater built by the Seabees for Bob Hope, looking out on 15,000 seats out there, made of artillery shell casings and boards, all bolted down, 15,000. So, as I say, I had it pretty good. I got a television and watched Armed Forces Vietnam Network. And one night, I saw these guys land on the moon. And I thought, frankincense, I am fighting a tribal war while these guys are capable of doing this. And this makes no sense. So, fast forward, that's July of July, August, September, October, November, December. 6 months later, Neil Armstrong comes to my place with the Bob Hope show. And so Bob Hope is up doing his thing. I had my assistant take the Bob Hope show because trying to think of a polite word. He was a jerk, basically a jerk. And he had sold the rights for the show for $4 million to Chrysler. And this is 1968 dollars before he even left, so that's how patriotic he was. But he was kind of a hawk, but he would be there telling his jokes, and I always liked his jokes and everything. But we were right down the hill from the 312th Medical Evacuation Hospital. And so the choppers, the rescue choppers would come in and they would ruin the timing of his jokes and he would glower at them. And 15,000 of us knew that it was somebody's worst day. So he didn't win any fans in that way. So anyway, he's doing this. Neil Armstrong is just standing in the back, kind of watching, and listening to the music and the girls dancing and everything. And finally, Bob Hope kind of reluctantly says, and now I'd like to introduce you to astronaut Neil Armstrong. And Neil comes up and he stands at the microphone and he looks and he says, I've been to the moon and back, and it doesn't mean anything unless we can learn to live together here on Earth. And 15,000 of us, stood up, many of us crying, because somebody got it, because, the different churches would come and do their big things and say, kill a commie for Christ, basically. But Neil Armstrong was there, and he was right there with us, and so I always loved him for that, So that was one of the many nice experiences I had being the entertainment coordinator, since you guys have actually asked, and I'm actually here, let me tell you about Martha Ray. So she came, and she is a colonel in the Nurse Corps. And, the story that I love about her is, she hangs out with the Green Berets. And at some point she's at this field hospital, and it's a tent, and some wounded are pulled in, and she says, so she starts to go in there, and the colonel gets in her way and says, oh, ma'am, you can't go in there, and she says, Colonel, you see this leaf on my collar? I got it way before you got yours. Out of my way. And she went in there and scrubbed up and was the nurse that she is. She's a Nurse Corps. So I loved her for that, But then she came, and she was just a lovely person, of course, and I knew her from all my life. And as a comedian and a singer and a personality. And so my job was to charter helicopters and write an itinerary, let them know we're coming, and take her out for a handshake tour. And so we get to this first LZ, and of course, all of the officers there know she's coming and know how important she is. And they're all out there, and they whip one on her, and she does it right back and shakes their hand, and then just turns on her heel and walks out to the perimeter where the lowly guys are. And she walks up to the first guy and says, growing a mustache. And she said, yes, ma'am. She said, shit, I have more hair under my arms. And I thought, oh, this is going to be a fun day. So, that sort of experience was peppering my life, One of my great treasures is taking Gypsy Rose Lee around. And she was swell. She was one of those very bright people wondering what the heck was going on. So she came over, and as an infantryman, I was able to tell her what it was like. And so I took her around for 2 days. At the end of the second day, we're getting in a chopper, and she says, Hutch, they tell me you're a musician. I said, well, yeah, that's what I do. And she said, I was a musician. I said, really? She said, I played the accordion, but Mama said it was covering up my greatest assets. And, the fact that Gypsy Rose Lee told me a mama joke means more to me than practically anything that happened in that time. So that was just, it was just a wonderful experience. So I had a lot of good experiences over there. My main thing, though, was, of course, as I said, I figured stuff out, figured what was real, what was at the center of my being. That was a big deal. But another big deal was learning that the government didn't always have my best interests in mind. That was something that I kind of caught on to over there. And so I have lived carefully since then. And I'm grateful, but I'm grateful to be back.
It's sort of.
Sort of. So
Your father was in the Great War, and yet he had very wise advice for you when you were setting out. Can you explain a little bit more about how he came to that wisdom?
yes. Not without using the term assholes in authority. So now, are you talking about my grandfather or my dad? The one who shook my hand? That was my dad, and he was in during the Second World War. He never had to go to combat, but Pop cried like a baby. He was so scared for Hutch when Hutch went. But when he was there, he felt that the Army was crazy, that there were people who had no idea what to do, who were telling the people who knew what to do. And it was just a terrible experience, and often putting them in harm's way. So I think that's what he meant when he said, don't be a hero, frankincense the army. He knew that if they told me go take that hill, it was because they weren't going to be with me, and that it did not make any sense to sacrifice myself. And he had no idea what it was like in Vietnam, because in the Second World War, there were lines, enemy lines. In my war, we would go up and take a hill, often at great cost, and then the next morning we would leave it. There was nothing gained, So he was really nervous that I was going to be a part of something that would hurt me or take me out of the pool, So he was pretty adamant in that. And, he wasn't adamant in a lot of things. He was a very easygoing guy who, he was strong. When I remember the guys, the men, the grown-ups playing King of the Raft, my dad was always the last one on the raft. But I remember him at a party one night when Gus Johnson got drunk and was trying to talk him into fighting him, trying to get him to fight. And my dad was saying, Gus, I'm not going to fight you. Not going to fight you, Gus, So before Vietnam, I didn't know but what I was a coward. And I got out there in the field and I was no more scared than anybody else. I did have a strong survival instinct, and I always played the percentages. When helicopters would come in, when we're out in the field, they would resupply us. Often hot meals at night, sometimes. And but these would come in, and I knew that this was about the biggest prize that a Viet Cong could get, was to kill one of these choppers, which was worth a lot of money in 1968 dollars. And so, I would just get in my hole and put my pot on, my steel pot. And because you can't hear the pop of a mortar over the sound of a chopper. And a couple times I was really glad that I did that, but I was just playing the percentages, And I'll tell you, I am just grateful I made it through so unscathed. And Patience Mason, who introduced me to my brother in arms here, asked me to, if I would do an interview for her book. Until Patience, PTSD was only talked about by professionals to professionals. That was all it was. They knew it, First World War, it was shell shock. then battle fatigue. In the Second World War, Korea was operational exhaustion. So now it's post-traumatic stress disorder. So they were talking about it, but nobody was talking about it with the people who were having to deal with it, the wives and the kids and everything like that. So she wrote this book called Recovering from the War, where she interviewed people who had been in the field. And so I told her all about it. And so my girlfriend at the time would sometimes house sit for them. So I would go over and the phone would ring, and it was those old-fashioned answering machines where I could hear. And several times I was there when the phone rang and it said, "Hey, my name is Bruce. I'm from Milwaukee, and I just wanted you to know your book saved my life. That's all. I don't, and I mean, several times this happened where people said that. So, had no idea what I was trying to say here. I had footnoted myself out of existence.
That's really interesting. That's interesting to me about that she writes something and then it saves somebody's life. I have realized that when we say our truths and it touches, just hearing somebody else say your truth. I worked with survivors of incest for a number of years, and just having people be able to share their story was healing. It made all the difference in the world to hear somebody having shared your experience and got through it. And so I think that's a
Well, I think it is, yeah.
really, really important point.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big part of what storytelling is about, is that we each can tell our stories and there's going to be somebody who relates to it. And I think that's really important. And I just want to encourage us as people that are, trying to gain in consciousness. I think it's up to us to tell our stories.
So what years were you there? And how was your reception when you came back? Because I know at certain points in the Vietnam War, when soldiers came home, they were really ridiculed and, spit on and just treated horribly.
Mhm.
So it depended, I think, on the year that you came back and all of
I
that.
came back in January of 70. I got there in Tet of 68. And when I came back, I turned into a hippie pretty quickly. My hair was protective coloration. I went through the airports and everything like that, and I didn't have anything unfortunate happen to me. But I grew out my hair out pretty quick. I always, even in Vietnam, in country, I always got a hat that was 2 sizes too big so that I could hide my hair under it. So I had a good start when I got home. But, it was just, I did not look like a soldier when I got back. After a very brief time, I was just another hippie.
Formed a culture.
Say that?
Well, we had formed a culture in Gainesville that included vets, I would say, and especially since Vets for Peace started in Gainesville and was very, very supported by the subculture. But we are a very strong subculture. There were many thousands of us here in Gainesville. So Bill and others they had, in our view, had come over to our side, basically.
Well, I mean, I vowed to try to get my brothers home. I was there when Jane Fonda made a public relations blunder But I knew that she was trying to get us home. And so about the third time it came up, Hanoi Jane and everything, I wrote her a letter and said, I was in the field. I knew what you were doing. You're trying to bring us home. I'm waiting for Nixon and Kissinger to apologize. And she sent me back a nice note. But, they never suffered for those millions of people who died. Millions. If, our wall on the mall is, how big it is. Well, if the people who had committed suicide when they got home had been included on that, it would be 4 times as big. And then if the civilians that we killed in Vietnam, it would go out miles. Because this was not very much compared to the total destruction of that. So, my mom would say, thus it has ever been. And it certainly seems to be the way it's happening now. But I'm telling you, there is a change in the air, and it is a change in consciousness. And we are tipping this world from darkness into light. There's a lag, for sure. But the world is changing. And here we are. You guys have quite a nice little family. Big family, but a family. And this will sustain us because the current infrastructure and the current way that things are done and the current society and the current technology is unsustainable. It can't help but collapse. It cannot help. It's not if, it's when. And it's those of us who have invested time and effort in love and support that are going to be the ones who are fine. And the whole thing that the people who are talking about the inevitable collapse is, we get through this with love and grace. That's how we get through. We get through this with joy. And that was why I was so happy when White Eagle said that same thing. And they have been put upon for, a long, long time, but you get through it with resilience and joy and celebration and everything. So no matter what happens, I hope you'll all invite me to come back and celebrate with you. Okay. Thank you. Is that good enough? Okay. Oh. I was here.
Yeah, I said that was important.
Yeah.